Пані та панове, ми зараз переходимо до нашої панельної дискусії, власне, де ми зможемо обговорити ті питання, про які говорив пан Лінк. І користуючись моїми правами модератора, я хочу зараз переключитися на англійську мову. I would like to switch to English. And I'm privileged to be a moderator and to ask the first question to the director Link. The ongoing aggression and the political crisis have stimulated polarization within the society. The effect of this polarization is visible at the level of family relations and at the level of society as a whole. To this end, what can be done in the light of the Russian aggression to prevent further split of the society? How do you think?
Well, first of all, I think I did quite recently talk very long. So I don't want to take too much time now from the panel, but what we had and what we saw for example, let's look back to the 1990s in the terrible wars in the former Yugoslavia, where indeed families, in the middle of families, splits happened and the civil society was deeply broken in many areas. Take, for example, Bosnia. And without drawing the analogy too far, because there are also a lot of differences, of course, with what happened in Yugoslavia to what happened here in and around Ukraine, there is one parallel, and that is indeed that always unguilty people suffer. And the split was going right through the families. Therefore, I think we need to be very aware that we should, in this situation, really not to force people to take sides. It's very important that we try to help them, independent where sometimes their personal sympathies or opinions are. Try to be inclusive. This is the point we want to do. And therefore, when we work with civil society, we don't ask, of course, the first question is not where you stand, but what do you need? What can we do to practically improve the situation? And always, please, that is also my point. We should also never forget that one day after the hot conflict is over, everybody needs to live together. And this needs to be reminded that after the fighting ended, it needs to be a living together again, hopefully in one family, hopefully in one country.
Дякую. Власне, я би хотіла розширити трошки аудиторію для цього запитання.
I'd like to expand the audience. I'd like to ask people from NGOs and from the experts community, your academic community. What is your reaction to this crisis? How we can prevent this split, this polarization in society? What is your role as an academic institution? Thank you for this question. If there's someone who could give a clear answer, an easy solution, it would be a great achievement. It's really difficult to say. Academies, university, also a part of civil society, also a part of our country, our society, and of course the problem we face, problem society faces, we face them in the same way. It's always a case that level of tolerance in academic institutions is higher than in society as general. After these events in Crimea, in Donbass, all Ukrainian universities open its doors for students and many teachers who left Crimea, who left Donbass, and allowed them to study or to teach at universities in the rest of Ukraine, controlled by the Ukrainian government. To be absolutely sincere, I could say that when I see lots of documents originating from the universities on the occupied territory, so-called Donetsk and Lugansk Republic, I don't see anything to do with science, with scholarship. I don't see anything related to academic issues. The only things I see are related to propaganda and that kind of things. I'm sure that Ukraine will be a united country, and refugees from Donetsk now working in Vinnytsia, they will be able to come back to Donetsk, come back to their universities. Ukrainian students will come back to their universities. At the same time, we should break through ideological rubbish that is covering real problems in the East. It will be our first step. We will need to find understanding with our Ukrainian partners. Traditionally, Russian universities had very good relationship with Ukrainian universities. At the moment, even if it didn't disappear to a full extent, it's very limited, but in future we'll have to renew it. Maybe it's not time right now. We should walk over all these events that are happening, and the level of ideological polarization in the society is very high. Level of emotional reaction in our society is very high, but in future we'll have to renew cooperation between academic circles. Well, actually, these circles are an Ukrainian elite. Mikhail Link said that crisis is always a problem, but it's also always an opportunity. In this context, we could see more opportunities for cooperation between government and civil society NGOs. And I put a question to Andrei Beshta, Director of Department for International Organizations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Where do you see areas of potential cooperation with civil society organizations? Thank you for your question. I will speak Ukrainian. Mr. Link, in his lecture, gave several examples of efficient cooperation, in particular after the start of Russian aggression. Let's look back 1 year. 1 year back, when green soldiers appeared in Crimea and out of the blue sky, and we applied to the Office for Assessment of Human Rights Situation in these areas occupied by unidentified soldiers. Mr. Link mentioned in his lecture he mentioned that it was the only organization that was able to give unbiased assessment and get access to Crimea. In the mission report, lots of Russian propaganda were refuted as a situation with human rights in Crimea, human rights of Russian speakers in Crimea. It was clearly assessed that there were no oppression of human rights, and in this sense Russian Federation's position was refuted, and in this case we see how efficient and how quick the office was in reacting to this situation in Ukraine. Mr. Link in his office provided monitoring of presidential and parliamentary elections, and conclusions made are difficult to appreciate well enough. It shows that we are ready to hold elections according to high international European standards, and it clearly showed that Russian allegations about the nature of our elections were wrong. Now we have local elections forthcoming, and all attention is now focused on holding these elections in the east of Ukraine under Minsk agreements. Such elections should take place without having legitimate election of legitimate authority in the east. After elections under the standards of Organization of Security in Europe, it's impossible to go forward. Ms. Lutkovska left us, but we are joined by Mikhailo Chaplega, head of department on HR of the Office of Commissioner of Human Rights. Of course, the Commissioner's Office plays an important role in protection of human rights, support of international standards in Ukraine. I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what are the main challenges for human rights, focusing in particular on Crimea and Eastern Ukraine? What mechanisms are there for implementation of mandate or Commissioner's mandate in Crimea? Starting from the end of your question, realistically, I don't know, maybe establishment of three-party mission, international mission, because two sides mission between Pamfilova on Russian part and our Human Rights Commissioner was voted by the Russian authorities, and to be honest, all these issues are serious. If we don't take precautions, we will be just supporting Russian actions, and we had an agreement, preliminary agreement, but unfortunately when Nils visited Crimea, Russia expected positive assessment, and now after they got critical assessment, there are more questions. Another issue, mission of EU Commissioner on minority rights. It's possible that we'll be able to go through this channel, but I don't see mechanism as yet. Cooperation with Ella Panfilova, ombudsman on Russian side. I wouldn't say she's very efficient, but in certain areas it's sufficient, in some areas not. For example, we had success with returning children who were brought to Russia under threat of guns. 2 months old children with serious medical disabilities, under very bad conditions, 35 degrees below zero, and they were transported to Russia to have a good propaganda story. Russia helping Ukrainian children when Ukraine is not in position to help it in any way. They were given kind of official documents not allowing these military people not to let Ukrainian children into this territory. Our cooperation with Russian Human Rights Commission was successful. We were successful in bringing all these children back to Ukraine. An example of failure, for example, on issues, well, you know, Nadia Savchenko, her imprisonment. We sent missions of human rights activists to place of her imprisonment. Unfortunately, the way she is treated doesn't give us any optimism. If there is no political component for Russian Human Rights Commission, we could cooperate successfully. If there's a political component, it's a problem. As to challenges in the East, first challenge is related to internal refugees. I think these problems could be solved. Our commission, all our office is working on this, on assistance to these refugees. There are organizational, technical problems. The Ukrainian state could have established a single body to work with these people. Why nothing has been done for 3 months? Should have been done last year. National strategy on realization of refugees' rights should have been adopted. Our position is as follows: the state should change its attitude towards refugees. It's not a burden. If you consider it to be just a burden, there's no way forward. It's a road to local conflicts. We think that it's really important to consider these people as a good labor force. They have good skills, good professions, and we should give them opportunities to work on their own, to get employed. In this case, this potential, if we treat them as a potential, not as a burden, it would be a burst for our economy. Of course, challenges in the East are also related to protection of human rights in the East. Very often the Russian side just spreading stories about Ukrainian servicemen committing crimes against human rights, but we acknowledge it. There are some cases like this. We bring such people to court. If they committed crimes, we prosecute them under Ukrainian law. Our Russian friends, what should we do? If we don't control this territory, how we can persecute these people? that's why we need to bring this territory back under our control so that we can investigate in an efficient way everything that happened or happening in this territory. As to the situation with Crimea, it's an absolutely new situation, never happened before, when a whole region becomes part of another country, not a territory with a special status, but a part of another country. It's a very special situation of hybrid warfare. And Ukraine is doing its best to solve the situation, but of course we probably could have done even better. When we discuss the situation our country is in, the ongoing aggression and the crisis, which is was started by the aggression, and in this connection I'd like to give a question to Roman, head of Department on Human Rights and Justice of Renaissance Foundation. What is in your opinion, what is the role of civil society groups in supporting the legislation for human rights? And actually, many societies went through such challenges. It's not something unique for Ukraine. With the growth of security threats, a readiness to restrict human rights in society is going up. It's not a unique situation for Ukraine. We can look at experience from other countries that were lived under aggression or terrorist attacks, and very often legislation was approved and resisted by NGOs, and civil society was not unified. Society considers security first, another thing second. But I would like to mention Thomas Jefferson words: when you give your freedom for something, you will get neither freedom nor anything. I think that our challenge is not to choose between two opposite options. We need a win-win strategy, because both values are important for society. Human rights and security. We should go through very serious challenge, because Maidan occurred in this country because the authorities were estranged from the people in an incredible way. To overcome this distance between the government and society is our objective today. We should use civil society as a we used to see civil society as a monitor, as a critic, but we should understand, in a situation of challenge, civil society should propose, should say A, B, C, D, and further on. And very often it's not easy psychologically for activists, active part of our society, who got used to the traditional role. Of course it stays there, but it's not enough. as to cooperation with government, with government bodies, we should consider civil society not as something secondary, collateral. I think Maidan changed a lot, but even today in many officials' heads there is an idea that, well, if you as civil society could help us through your contacts in international organizations, that's okay. If not, we will do it as we do. But I would like to emphasize that it's not something secondary. It's not something optional. The security challenge, this aggression our country faces, has lots of dimensions. Military dimension is only one of them. It's important to see the challenge at the level of values. Our ability to understand our values, to unite different institutions in support of these values in a comprehensive way, in spite of challenges that are increasing in intensity. This response to encroachment on key values should be given, and there are different ways of response. I'm sure that this evolution of conscious will create an environment with more commitment to key values, to see Ukrainian society united around these key values. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get down to your questions, I would like to use this opportunity to put a question to Igor Georg, head of Laboratory of Legislative Initiatives. I'd like to come back to the topic of our presentation, the project of strengthening dialogue among civil society and key government stakeholders in Ukraine. Igor, where do you see a need for strengthening this dialogue, and what are priorities in your opinion? Is it at the moment, are there any gaps, any problems to solve? Thanks, I thought you forgot about me. First of all, there's one particularity. Presentation of the project is made not as a formal presentation, but as a sort of roundtable with lots of opinions. I welcome such approach. I welcome this this way of organizing events, in particular in these premises of the Academy, which inspire us to strengthen democracy and protect human rights. 305 years ago, the first constitution of Ukraine was written by Philip Orlik, who was a graduate of this academy. Looking back 1 year ago, Euromaidan, Revolution of Dignity, an absolutely new face of civil society in Ukraine. Before we saw just a number of NGOs, now we have lots of different groups, movements, civil society organizations, volunteers. Of course, these movements should be formalized, and there was a report by Venetian Commission on freedom of association. We need to give a room, a space for NGOs to develop, As this new quality of civil society testifies a lot to the changes in our country. There's a need for better access, better capabilities. First of all, access to information. Without access to information, society is not empowered to participate. This is a basic, fundamental need. Third and fourth, we need new faces in the parliament. Democratic lawmaking, code of parliamentary ethics. These are very important factors in the parliament. About 60% of our parliamentarians, they are new people. They never participated. They never been in the parliament. I'm glad to see young politicians originating in a civil society, becoming parliamentarians. They are not just supporting. They are already doing things. They organize groups in the parliament, and they promote ideals of Maidan in the lawmaking process. Another problem, I think it's also a very important one, quality of lawmaking. It's a huge challenge. 15 years, we have been working for 15 years with the parliament, but unfortunately a lot of laws, about 2,000 draft laws were registered this year. How to work with this huge quantity? How to make these laws realizable? How to ensure good quality? How to organize dialogue between stakeholders, civil society, government bodies. This project will be another important step to advance this culture, advance capabilities of civil society to take part in this process, to advance capabilities of the government bodies, to coordinate, to cooperate with civil society, to bring them to committee hearings, and at last activities by the office forum of civil society that took place in Wien recently on lawmaking. During 2 days, 50 important conditionality requirements, preconditions were elaborated for participant countries to provide basis for citizens' participation. At last, at the beginning of this year, the Minister of Justice established a working group for working on public consultation laws, public hearing laws. On Monday, first hearing will be held. There's some steps taken, some good signs. I hope in this inclusive way we will work together with Andrei, being members of Constitutional Commission. We taking part in the process. And we hope that our citizens will abide by the laws in our Constitution, and in this way will take part in development of laws and lawmaking. Legislative process is what's done by our parliamentarians, and lawmaking as a whole is made by the whole society.